Okay, well, thank you very much. If we continue, maybe we start to take a seat, of course. Okay, well, thank you very much. We are now approaching the end of the Brussels Economic Forum, the 25th anniversary. Also, thank you to Sasha for that conversation. And in this final part, there is a favor, actually, that I have to ask from you to make this work. And that is, remember at the start, we spoke about the Slido that you can use. And we are going to ask you a question. So my favor, is a personal favor to me, is to use that Slido and answer the question that we are going to bring up. Because this final session will focus on industrial policy. Of course, industrial policy is now one of the key topics in this commission, and it will put out a question. This is a perennial question in Brussels, as you know, which is, should we foster, create this environment to promote European champions? This idea of creating bigger, stronger European companies, obviously there's benefits, but there's also risks. So the question, if they could put it up also on the screen, will give you two options: in favor of creating European champions, and then against. Obviously it's not easy, and as ever, there's also downside risks potentially to that. So the vote is open, and what I'm going to ask you is just to respond to that question. Yes or no, are you in favor, or would you be against fostering the space of European champions? Do you believe this is a good debate, or is it an old debate that never really gets anywhere? And again, the reason why we ask you now is because we are now going to have an Oxford-style debate with two speakers who will speak in favor and against, and we want to see whether by the end of the session you've changed your mind. So please do vote, because it's very useful for the forum, and it will be very useful to me too. And on that note, I want to bring in on stage Cristina Caffarra, who, well, you don't need any introduction. You've been doing this for many years, 20 years experience in Brussels. You've looked at antitrust, consumer protection, digital protection, many high-profile cases that you have worked on. And as I mentioned today, you will be saying, yes, this is the time to create European champions. Now, of course, it's a debate, so we have to find opposing views, and that is Eeckhout, who is a professor. He is based in, well, Barcelona. He obviously is a professor at UPF University. That is Pompeu Fabra. I would know because I'm Spanish, so we're everywhere. It's a great university, so thank you so much, but you are going to argue no. Actually, this is not going to work, or at least it's not as easy as it seems. So please continue to vote. And I see as it stands, well, Jan, you're going to have to do a lot of work, actually, because a vast majority would say yes, they believe this is the time. Now, before we give you the stage, just to remind, of course, the rules is that all of you, well, you will get 8 minutes to make your case. You will also respond. There will be a counter-argument, and then a final thought, and then a final vote to see whether or not you changed your opinions. Obviously, the question was clear. Should we create an environment to foster European champions? Should we do it through industrial policy? And what is even industrial policy? So, you know, that's a very timely topic in this commission. So, Madame Caffarra, the stage is yours. So you have 8 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. This is, I need to say at the beginning, a bit of a peculiar situation. One, because I'm a friend of Ian, and we always agree on everything. So we'll work hard on disagreeing, I think, on this one. The second is really that, as some of you know, I've been involved in competition policy for many years. And so a number of people here, even today, have said to me, I was very disturbed to see that you were kind of taking the position in favor of European champions because of reasons we will see. Normally, the competition bubble doesn't really take that position favorably. So I think this is a challenging position and one I'm very happy to defend at this point. So what I want to start from is, of course, the spirit of Mario Draghi has been hovering above this event all day. And I think I inevitably will also want to just kick off from some of the observations he has made. Of course, his foundational report has said things that we in Europe have known for some time. We've had reports along those lines before, but there are some really stark things that he said, and I want to boil it down to a couple of messages that set the stage for what I'm going to say after. So, of course, the diagnosis for where we are is not new. We know what it is. We have all of the facts of regulation and fragmentation and so on. But he puts it very starkly. We are effectively in a position in which Europe's economic and social contract is simply unsustainable. And these are the words he uses. So we are an open, super open, export-oriented economy based on SMEs, and our economic model is not going to be sustainable. He has two very important problems that he points to, and I think it is important to pause and discuss what that is about. The first one that was mentioned in the previous panel by Luca Di Meo is the demand side of things, because of course we worry a lot about competitiveness, but our real problem as Europeans is that we don't have a demand growth engine at this point internally to drive us forward. The point was made very well, I won't belabor it, but the reality is that the United States is where it is because it has an enormously effective consumer demand that keeps driving that engine. In Europe, demand has effectively fallen since the financial crisis, and we do not have enough internal domestic demand to drive that growth engine forward. If you don't have that growth happening, the engine doesn't turn. And that is of course important because we are in a situation in which we are going to find it very hard to replace that domestic demand that we are not being able to activate through our usual way of exporting. We are between the American hammer and the Chinese handle, and we are not going to be able to, at this point, unless we really change the way we think about it, drive it forward. The second observation that Mario Draghi makes is that we have, of course, a massive problem of productivity growth. Productivity growth is decoupled from the US and effectively remains flat, fairly flat in Europe, and is growing in the US. And this is, again, a source of our issues. The third one, and I'm getting closer to the point, is Mario Draghi repeats several times in his report that European firms are subscale. This expression is used repeatedly. European industrial base is subscale, and not just even SMEs. We are talking about micro enterprises with enormous difficulties to grow. And there is even effectively what has become now a meme. We know that we have very few world-scale companies in Europe. You have endless memes in social media in which various illustrations bubble showing all of the just giant market cap of American firms, and European is a scatter of ants in a little diagram. Why does size or scale matter at the end of all of this? It matters because productivity improvement requires technology. There is no question that given the demographic of Europe, we are going to just drive productivity up through demand and, most importantly, through technology. And the reality is that if you do not have size, technology does not diffuse. Technology adoption is linked to firm size. And this is a very clear finding in every way, that firms that are small do not adopt technology. This is the reality of Europe. Why are we so behind? Because the first digital revolution is one in which we've not partaken effectively because many firms have been too small. Now we are on the verge of the second digital revolution, AI, and there is a question of whether we will be able to adopt in a way that is sufficient. So where does that take us? The proposition of whether we need champions, it seems to me self-evident. I do not intend for champions monopolies. There is this conflation that people always make. When you're talking about champions, you must be talking about monopolies. And this is where I think a mistake is being made, and we are too much beholden to a competition ideology, I want to say, that we are pursuing still, which at this point, given the Draghi predicament, given the Trump vector of change, is obsolete. We can no longer continue to tell each other, as we do in the competition bubble, competition, competition, competition. We need to pursue competition because it drives innovation and growth. True to a point. No one will actually say that concentrated markets are better for innovation necessarily. But we need to be more open to breaking this silo, this intellectual silo in which the competition bubble is absolutely stuck. When you talk to anyone in the competition world, if you talk about these things and you suggest maybe, just maybe, we can experiment a little bit, we can see where we go with some of this, instead of being so close-minded and say competition is all we need, talk to the hand, we can never have anything else, because only with competition will drive growth. There are experimentation to be made. Mario Draghi was vilified in telcos because he was suggesting that maybe some telco mergers could happen, and the competition bubble had conniptions because they said he is beholden to the telco lobby. I don't really care for the telco lobby. The point is, do we want to see whether maybe some price increase may be worth an investment change or an investment increase? We don't know for a fact that these things are absolutely true. And wherever you have a merger, things go necessarily wrong. We need to be able to experiment. The last thing I will say in my last few seconds, is that, of course, the other reason why we have such aversion to the idea of European champions is because we are very leery of industrial policy. Industrial policy has been a problem, it's failed in so many cases, and we keep looking back at the experiment of Southeast Asia or at the experiment of Latin America. Let's look at what's before our noses. The US with the IRA policy has been quite successful. China doesn't bear thinking about. We are still fiddling, and in the meantime, we are still talking about, our procurement rules are so incredibly wide. We allow for everybody to come and sell in Europe. How about we sort of do something serious like buy European at some point? How about that being a plank of our economic policy, of our industrial policy? That could help create that demand we so desperately need.
Well, thank you for that. There's a lot there. I mean, you mentioned buy European, the ideology of competition. That's a topic. We need an hour for that. But I also, like you referred to Mario Draghi, and last week in Portugal, he did say something that you alluded to. If Europe wants to grow, it has to create it. It needs to come now from Europe. It's not going to come from the outside of the world as the only driver. So thank you so much. And now, well, the vote, and a round of applause, of course. I know you said you're friendly, but, go ahead.
So thank you. First of all, I agree, Cristina, and I think we all agree here in the room that Europe needs more innovation. We're lagging behind, and we need to protect certain sectors for strategic interest, for critical resources. But today we have a very specific question that we have to vote on. And not only do we want to vote on it, we want to also put it forward to our policymakers. And I would like to, with your permission, to unpack that question word by word. Let me start with champions. If we pick champions, we have to pick winners. There's a sector that does this, venture capital, but it seems that now we want our politicians to do that. And I think, as citizens, we don't want that. And I don't think even the politicians want that responsibility. It's much more important to put the citizen central, whether that's the customer, whether that's the entrepreneur, whether that's the worker, and the firm is a means to an end. But the champion is not the objective. Of course, we have to embrace scale, because current digital global technology is all about scale. But we have to make sure that there's at the same time competition, and we know how to do that. We have a concept that's interoperability, which means that, for example, I can take a train from Paris to Lyon, and it's a monopoly, the train line, but still today there's competitors operating on that monopolistic train line. That's implementation of successful policy that embraces scale, but at the same time generates competition. So we don't create champions, instead we create competitors. Startups are a bit like playful puppies, creative, innovative, but when they become champions, they're a bit more like wolves, maybe wild wolves that come to the farm and steal some of our sheep. What we really want is we want to transform these playful puppies into border collies that tend the farm, that tend the sheep, that are beneficial to what we're creating in the economy. And so, no, I don't think we want champions in that way. I would say the only champions I want this year is either going to be Inter Milan or Paris Saint-Germain.
No, that's going to be hard.
Let's say in Barcelona next year. What about industrial champions? Industry accounts for about 10% of employment. Do we want agriculture champions too? In my view, it's a profound misrepresentation of what the economy is today to focus on industry. The economy is an amalgam of intersecting forces with global supply chains, with services being the big component, with sectors like education, like entertainment, like healthcare, that each of them are bigger than industry. If we're going to put more resources in industry, does that mean that we're taking away from these other sectors that are successful? We want European industrial champions. What's the geography of that? Clearly, there's fewer tech firms based in Europe than there are in the United States. But notice that Chicago doesn't have tech firms. Alabama doesn't have tech firms. Most parts of California don't have tech firms. Tech firms in the United States means a postal address of the headquarters. But what matters for the economy is really where is the user, where is the customer, where is the worker, and those are all over the place. We all use these devices and these technologies here in Europe as much as we do in the United States. And thinking about pigeonholes and blocking off the economy, maybe through tariffs or isolating certain resources, is impossible. We cannot turn back the clock and say, you know, this digital technology, these intangibles are not going to cross these borders that we erect. These digital technologies are here to stay, so we have to take a view that's global about how to channel this digital technology in a global world, and we can start here in Europe. We talk about fostering the creation of these European industrial champions. I hear a lot these 800 billion euros that are earmarked to create that. In the year where the Nobel Prize in Economics was given to Acemoglu, Johnson and Robinson, for proving that institutions are really the driver behind growth. I think we should, as Europe, focus on building institutions instead of doling out money. I know that from a political point of view, it's easy to dole out money and hard to build institutions, but we have a track record of institutions in Europe. These are pro-democratic, pro-competition, and these are institutions that are rule-based, not on extracting rents. And I think we can do that. So I don't think we want mega firms. If you look at other economies, take MAGA, Make America Great Again, today it's built on the premise of the concentration of economic wealth by a few tech bros who use that power, that economic power, to influence the political power. Take Murga, Make Russia Great Again. In the 90s and 2000s, the oligarchs took the natural resources and propped up a dictatorship. Do we want mega? Do we want Make Europe Great Again like that? I think, again, we should build our institutions. Let's listen or let's read the great thinkers from last century, from the left to the right, from Orwell to Hayek. The concentration of economic power creates the concentration of political power and therefore dictatorships. I don't think we want to do that. We want to listen again to Monet and to Schuman instead. Now, of course, you often hear that the United States innovates and Europe regulates. And there's a lot of truth in that. The IMF has recently shown that the barriers we still have in our internal market amount to a 45% tariff and even higher for services. Europe has a lot of work to do. A friend of mine, Ashley, an American entrepreneur, has a startup based in Barcelona. She likes Barcelona because she can have access to very good engineers and software developers. But there's a few caveats to her startup here. You know, they build this beautiful product which is based on blockchain technology that traces contracts around the world. But all her employees are not on the payroll. She has to contract them. Why? Because it's way too complicated for a dynamic startup to deal with the sclerotic labor market regulations in Spain. And her company, her startup, is incorporated in Wilmington, Delaware, in the United States, not in Spain. Because it takes her 45 days to start the company. She has to stand in line for a notary to get a stamp on a piece of paper and deal with useless bureaucracy. We can do better in Europe. We can do better in Europe to create dynamic institutions that allow for dynamic startups. So what is it that we're really discussing today? Again, we agree that we want more progress, we want to do this through innovation. But I believe it's very important that we do this through creating institutions, not doling out money, and that we do this by creating institutions that are not going to concentrate power, that are going to create a type of companies like these startups, okay, which are initially playful puppies, but they become border collies that work in the interest of the farm. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. Of course, some of the challenges he presented. What's the take?
Yeah, so I think that much of what Jan says is in some sense beside the point relative to what I said. I never said that we need to foster the growth of monopolists in Europe, and no one in their right mind will say that. Let's not talk semantics. When we talk about champions, what do we mean? I certainly don't mean monopolists. I mean companies of a decent size that can scale and that can effectively adopt technology. There can be more than one champion in a sector. I don't mean to say that it's got to be a single one. So it is a question of definition, but we certainly need muscle. The next thing is, you were downplaying the role of industry in Europe. Jan, I think, you know, it may be 11% under some metrics. Do we need industrial might in Europe? Hell yeah, we do. Because the reality is that we do have a lot of industrial capability. And even if our car industry is going down, in reality we have incredible machinery capability, for example, in Germany, in green technology. We make planes, we make more of this than the US actually do. And in a world in which we've been defenestrated by the United States, we've been thrown overboard, we need actual capability here to build drones, tanks, backpacks with antennas on, and we need to do it physically in Europe. I do not see how we can import this. So do we need industrial capability? Absolutely. We are not going to all sell handbags and services. This is clear to me. The next point is there's also this sort of suggestion that in order to foster these champions, one needs to just dole out money. I certainly am not in favor of doling out money, the 800 billion, whatever they are. Industrial policy doesn't mean necessarily only subsidies, right? There is a basket of tools which are being used in industrial policy, some of which may have to do with subsidies, of course, but there is a ton of other things. Indeed, the American in the IRA Act and the Chinese use a basket of things. And when I talk about buy European, nobody is spending a cent. We are talking about procurement rules that say buy European. So I think these are kind of ways of dragging us back from the precipice. Of course, economic power, if it is very extensive, begets political power. And of course, a lot of this is exposed potentially to the danger of political influence. Don't we know it? It's obvious. But so is every form of economic policy. So we need to be watching out that this thing doesn't become a way for the politician to reward their friends. We are all aware of it. This is not the point. But we cannot just continue to say, well, let's not go there because it might all end up in tears. It's ending up in tears anyway if we do nothing. So I'll leave it there.
Well, on that note... So, response?
Tina, I agree because, you know, as you said earlier, we've known each other for a long time, and you're eloquent and you're smart. You're eloquent like a legal scholar. You're smart like an economic theorist, and at the same time using facts like, you know, an econometrician. And I agree with everything you say, but again, I want to come back to the question that we have at hand, that we were trying to answer today. And let me give an example of the type of policy that we already do that looks very much like that industrial policy. I'll give the example from my current hometown, Barcelona, where for years the local government has used state aid to prop up a company, a car producer. So state aid is basically your local government, your regional government, your national government puts money aside either through subsidies or through tax breaks to attract companies. You probably remember the Amazon attraction in New York City, 5, 6, 7 years ago, that then didn't go through. But we do this in Europe all the time. We already try to create these champions. We're doing this, okay? And it's, in my view, one of the biggest failures of economic policy in Europe. Because what has happened? This company has for years promised that it would build electric vehicles there, near Barcelona. They've taken the money and never built the electric vehicles. They're now gone. The amount of money that the government spent on this company was much more than, which was the politicians' argument, the jobs that we needed to protect. We could have given that money and they would have had multiple times the salaries plus pensions for the rest of their lives. But what happened is that this money went straight to the shareholders. And I don't think that's the type of industrial policy we want. And then what happened? They left. The premises near the airport became vacant. They were taken over by actually small new car producers that produces electric vehicles, exactly what we wanted. But it was without that, championship that we were trying to create. It came, just in a much more natural startup way that we got. And that means, we can do it. Of course, again, we have to embrace scale. Scale is key now. We cannot do anything in the current economy without scale. But it doesn't go through creating champions. It's going through creating basically dynamic firms. Dynamic firms that often through competition, often through being lucky and becoming bigger, but not through creating these champions that become complacent and stop innovating. Remember, smaller firms innovate more than large firms. You say, how's that possible? Yes, large firms innovate a ton, but innovation per capita, whether that's per unit of sales or per worker of large firms, is lower than innovation per capita for small firms. So we will have more innovation if we have many small firms than if we have one large firm. And that's the key here. We're going to get innovation from this dynamic small firms.
Well, thank you for that, this intellectual debate. Thank you very much, and also very polite debate, I must say. And thanks. And now, of course, this is the conclusion. You have 2 minutes. I think you've made your case pretty passionately already, but this is the case, and this is the final 2 minutes.
So if the exam question was, do we believe that state aid was a cluster FFF, and then Jan and I can get married and go into the sunset, because of course it is.
Wow.
So state aid policy is of course a complete disaster in Europe, but it is not what I mean when I think of industrial policy. Of course, one needs to do it smartly. It hasn't been done smartly. It's corrupt and problematic. So the issue here is, again, of course, no one wants to create concentrated markets by definition, but there is a level of scale that we need to achieve, and there are threats that are coming from outside that are novel, and we need to actually, we are not in 2003, we are in 2025. So, do I care if there is a merger of satellite providers in Europe that creates maybe some concentration? Ooh, the competition bubble will have breakdowns. The alternative is Elon Musk. How do we feel about that? Right? So if there is a little bit of market power in satellite communication, am I going to have a breakdown? I am not sure. Because at the moment, we are at the dark door of hell. And if we don't know, there is already war at the border. So I think that we need to embrace the fact that we are no longer in this nirvana in which we can talk about small firms are more innovative and they create lots of innovation. Where is this innovation? Where is it gone? Ian, we have had these kind of arguments from the competition bubble since the beginning of time. You just keep them small and cute and they will innovate. And then where does it go? And that's why we are where we are. So I don't really for a moment suggest that we should have monopolies or that we should have extractive market power or threats to democracy. But we are in a different reality. And unless we embrace it and act on it, I think we're lost.
Well, thank you for that. You referred to Elon Musk. I'm sure you referred to the Starlink, which, by the way, he's already doing and approaching European, a number of governments across the world. So thank you for that and those closing remarks. You even had a marriage proposal, I think I understood at some point. So
I take
that we'll leave it for later. But for the time being, a conclusion, and then you think about yes or no to another type of question. But this, for the time being, this topic.
Cristina, I say yes. So, I mean, clearly we have to intervene. This is not a question of whether we need policy or not. We need policy. And it's going to be very important that we get the policy right. And this is what we'll be debating today. We're debating about the details of the policy. even if we agree on the content, we want to be really right on the details of the policy. And what does the policy demand? It demands institutions, and it demands creating a framework where firms can operate. At the moment, we don't have that framework. We don't have those institutions. My friend Ashley, operates in Europe. Nothing is on the books in Europe. It's all somewhere else. And that's Europe's own fault. We have a lot of work to do in our single market to create those institutions that are going to allow these firms to be active here. Second, we have to embrace scale. It's all about scale. And scale by itself, if it creates a little bit of monopoly power, that's not a problem per se. It's a problem if we only have monopolies. And so therefore, using interoperability that we're doing perfectly well, Europe is an example in telecommunications, in transportation, high-speed railways, to implement scale together with competition. We know how to do it, we have done it, we just have to scale it up, also our policy. And I think Europe is a leader now in terms of ideas. What we see that happens on other continents, I don't think is an example of how you want to run a country, how you want to run an economy. And I think Europe, having a lot of work to do, can take the success stories that we have today, can take what we know how to do best, based on very firm principles, democratic principles, pro-competition principles, principles of running sound institutions, and we can be prosperous, and we'll turn those playful puppies in border collies.
Well, thank you for that. And now, of course, you've heard from the two of them. Now I'm going to ask, if possible, to bring up again the poll. And, of course, before we saw that in the initial results, thank you very much, it was a clear yes, we are in favor. Now the votes are back on. Please vote again, because we want to see whether or not the arguments in some way changed your mind in this debate, which of course, Cristina Caffarra, thank you very much, Eeckhout, too, very structured, very polite, but also food for thought. And we see that there's still a very passionate debate as to what do we mean by industrial policy when we talk about industrial policy? But also, two, when we talk about a champion, what is a European champion specifically in this moment? But of course, we see that industrial policy is not one of the big topics of this commission. So please, if you can continue to vote, that would be great. In favor, against, do you believe we should now, this is the time to finally make this happen? Many years of debate have taken place, but now, should we do it now in this edition of the Brussels Economic Forum? 25 years. Maybe we don't wait another 25. So, yes, we have voted now. Okay, very good, excellent. So I'm hoping at some point we are going to get the new results. Remember, you use the slide and then you put the code EUBEF25, and then hopefully very soon we'll get the questions up again with the new results. Jan, do you think you're going to do better this time? That you've managed to
I started low. I hope to do a little bit better.
It can only get better, exactly.
Let's hope we get to 50.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I believe we're close, but we're just going to give you a few more seconds, and then I believe now we do round the votes, and it is done. And, well, it was which speaks to the nature of this debate. It's still up for debate in so many great ways. Are you surprised by the result? Do you believe this is still?
Well, yes, I am, because I think that this is not where we are. Simple as that. I mean, this is the old stuff that we heard the Commission say forever, and I don't think we should be there.
And it's time to move it up. Well, thank you so much to the two of you. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much, Cristina Caffarra, Eeckhout. It was wonderful. Thank you very much. Good to hear. Excellent.